start with our initial introductory comments. There's a couple of announcements to make. First of all, Barry Williams won't be here today. He has an excused absence. I think he's in Mexico City, is that right? Yeah, so he's doing diplomacy work in Mexico. On behalf of the board, I'd like to thank Pasquale and HNC for hosting the meeting and opening up their office and providing free Wi-Fi and free lunch, right?
Our pleasure.
Oh, not free lunch.
Free observation.
Okay, maybe free rides down the slide, possibly. Lunch will be delivered at 11:30. I trust everybody got a menu in the last couple of days, so anybody who didn't, speak up now. We'll also leave a sandwich, or Pasquale will cook in the kitchen over there. After, we're going to break for lunch about 11:30, and then try to keep the lunch break short if we can, maybe a half an hour, and then that'll give us a little bit of time to go up and do the tour, and then get back. I think we're going to try to get through all of our open session discussions prior to lunch, and then break for lunch, do the tour, come back, and we'll do closed session. Makes it a little easier on any public members who want to participate, so they don't have to go cool their heels for an hour and a half while we're doing a tour, and then come back and close the open session. So we're going to try to get through that, which I think is very possible. We're fortunate to be having some presentations on some of the IPAL programs. So from Woodbury University, we have Catherine Roussel.
She's getting
Was here.
She's getting her laptop.
She's now left. Okay. And from, let's see, her department, and then Michael Risak. Risak, is that how you pronounce that? Risak. Is he here?
The H is not.
He's not here either. Okay. 2 for 2. And then Charles LaGreco from USC is not here either. Okay.
They'll probably come later.
Okay. That would be helpful. As usual with our board voting requirements, we're going to be webcast as we have in the past, and we will try to remember to repeat motions and seconds for the record as we go through the process, and then all votes again will be done by roll call vote by our capable trustworthy secretary, because that's his favorite job to do. Her, sorry. So that kind of concludes the open remarks. Pasquale explained where restroom facilities are and things. So at this time, I would like to ask if we have any public members who have comments that may not be on the agenda but would like to make a comment.
Just point of order, do we need to convene the meeting and call for open?
Is that,
Yeah. Somewhere in there.
I think that's next.
Oh, yeah?
Yeah.
Cool. After the comments? Okay.
After public comment.
Okay. Cool.
Well, maybe not. Do we have any public comments now that I've said that? Oh, lots of them. Okay. Then maybe
Oh,
we
I'm sorry.
should, maybe we should,
Before you proceed, can
Yes.
you call it to order and establish the quorum?
okay, let's do that.
Thank you.
The secretary, you want to take
I'm the
the
secretary.
Sorry. Madam Secretary,
He's still
would you take the roll?
Absolutely. Please. John Baker.
Here.
Denise Campos.
Here.
Tim Pham.
Yeah.
Pasquale Gutierrez.
Here.
Sylvia Quag here. Ebony Lewis.
Here.
Matt McGinnis.
Here.
Robert Pearman.
Present.
Niels Serrano.
Here.
Very good. We have a point.
We have a quorum.
Okay. Public comments. Sure.
Good morning, Kurt Koenig, representing the American Institute of Architects, California Council. I wanted to bring up something that will be coming to the CAB staff for future presentation to the full board, and that is one of our members, Michael Strogoff, who does a lot of continuing education programs, has raised a concern about the quality of some of the programs out there made available to architects, and that they're not unlike a lot of online comedy traffic schools. They're not good quality information, and it's a concern to him if accessibility is a concern to us as a continuing education requirement. And so he asked that I raise this issue to the board today because he would like to then approach the board staff to begin a dialogue about if there is anything that the board can participate in improving the quality of the continuing education programs available through perhaps requiring some standardization for content. We know that this is not something that the board currently has the authority to do, but it is something that we'd like to have a conversation about.
Very good. Thank you.
Thank you.
Yes, sir.
I just wanted to introduce myself again. My name is Andy Bowden, and I'm the chair of the LATC. Just want to let everybody know that the LATC is being represented at the meeting today.
We have minutes in the packet from the June 9th and the July 28th conference call. Let's address June 9th first. Do we have a motion to approve those minutes?
So moved.
Moved by Ebony?
No, you'll second.
Oh, no, I'm sorry.
Do you want us to say our name, please?
Second? No, I was looking down when you
Oh,
started.
okay. I
Wait a
think
second.
I'll second.
Okay. Moved and seconded. Any comments? Okay, I'll take a roll call vote.
You should John Baker,
Aye.
Denise Campos,
yes.
Tim Finn,
Yes.
Oscar Rivera,
Yes.
Sylvia Kwan, yes. Ebony Lewis,
Yes.
Matt McGinnis,
Yes.
Robert Pearman,
Yes.
Enzo Serrano.
Aye.
Very good. The July 28th conference call, board meeting minutes. Is there a motion to approve? Thank you.
I second.
Seconded by Keon. Any comments, changes, corrections? Okay, roll call vote.
Yeah, John Baker,
Aye.
Denise Campos,
Yes.
Tim Finn,
Yeah.
Oscar Gutierrez,
Yes.
Sylvia Kwan, yes. Ebony Lewis, Matt McGinnis,
Yes.
Robert Pearman,
Yes.
Enzo Serrano.
Yes.
Very good. July 28th board meeting minutes are approved. Next on our agenda is the executive officer's report.
Thank you, John. A couple items. First and foremost, he already spoiled the surprise, but we do have a different attorney with us today. Michael Santiago is here on Rebecca's behalf. Rebecca is on her honeymoon, so welcome, Michael. Additionally, we have a new enforcement manager that some of you have met, but Alicia Hedgie is here. She's taken Justin's position, and she's been with us for almost a month now. And she's got her arms around things and has rolled out some new administrative tools. So we're looking forward to having her as part of the team. Our next meeting, and please be sure this is on your calendar because it's the strategic planning session. So we're in Sacramento for December the 15th and 16th, and the session will be a little bit different. DCA's operation does the facilitation. It's called Solid Strategic Organizational Leadership, or something like that is what it stands for. And John and I both actually had to sign a 5-page contract that specifies our process, the board's concurrence with some of the steps, et cetera. So I'm looking forward to seeing how the new and improved process works and what it translates to in terms of our plan.
What were the dates again, please? December?
15th and 16th, or a Thursday and a Friday.
Okay, thank you.
Moving forward, Breeze, this is the business management system that other boards have rolled out. The first wave of boards was rolled out in 2013. That was phase 1. We're in phase 3. We did that intentionally. We wanted to let the other phase work out the bugs, and hopefully we'll have a smooth rollout. There were some issues with implementation. Ultimately, the contract with the prime vendor was terminated, and DCA is exploring other options as we move forward. For us, the department's going to be leading us through a business planning process where we'll look at our existing systems and map them. We'll also look at solution requirements. We also have to use a control agency's methodology, the Department of Technology's 4-stage project approval life cycle. Pardon me for reading, but I wanted to get this officially in the department's language. The final step will ultimately be implementation. It's not clear at this point if it will be with a vendor or with DCA's information technology staff. Moving forward, we do have committee meetings coming up. The Communications Committee is meeting on November the 10th, and the Executive Committee is on December the 11th. We also have LATC meeting on October the 12th. Newsletter, this is something Alicia's really made a priority and done a good job with. We published our most recent edition on September the 19th. We also published the edition prior to that on August the 4th, which was our special edition that we committed to doing. We now do a quarterly plus 2 special editions, so we're doing 6 a year now. Social media-wise, we're doing very well with Twitter, and we now have Instagram. I haven't checked my phone, but I think we're at 1,000 followers now for Twitter. And for those of you who don't follow us yet, how's this for an infomercial? You can follow us on our handle is CA Architects BD. The CAA is all caps and B is caps. CAA Architects BD. And we have little, for those members of the public that are here, we have our little cards, coasters, whatever you want to call them, with our handle on them. Moving forward, we are prepared to release our RFP for an additional architect consultant contract. Those who have been on the board for a while know the important role that our architect consultants play. They are contractual, yet they actually work out of the board office, so on any professional practice issues for enforcement cases, on licensing issues, et cetera. It's just a tremendous, vital resource. There is an objective in the strat plan to authorize an additional contract, so we're working on doing that. I don't know that we currently have the workload to justify having 3 under contract at the same time, but we are in the process of seeking to renew the contract that we have, or launch the process. I can't tell you who's obviously going to prevail.
I have a question though.
Yes.
How is that RFP going out to the
To
population?
people. A couple different ways. There is a system through the Department of General Services where folks have subscribed to certain types of contracts, so that's the primary means, but then we're also taking some steps ourselves. We'll be tweeting about it. We have an email subscription list that we'll send it to. We'll send it to the local AI chapters, National Organization of Minority Architects. We have a number of different collateral groups that we'll forward it to, but we're open to other ideas as well.
Are we, this is for legal counsel, are we also hindered by Prop 209 under this RFP?
Not that I see.
Okay, so are we making an effort to reach out to women and minorities to take on this, to apply?
Yes, we are working through NOMA. I'm open to suggestions on other groups for women. I know there is a design equity organization that we've interfaced with communications-wise, so we can certainly see if that's another venue as well. But if anybody has other organizations they would like us to share it with,
Yeah,
please let me know and we'll do it.
So there's AAAE, which is, there's one in San Francisco, one in Los Angeles, and that stands for Asian American Architects and Engineers. They're both organizations that are comprised of architects, engineers, and so forth. There's also, you mentioned the Equity by Design Group.
Yes.
That's handled directly, it's actually handled through the AIA. So I'm trying to think of, I mean, obviously we want California architects, that makes it easier.
Sacramento region architects, since they have to work at our office. So that's why generally if you're an architect and you're an AI member, and a good percentage are, you'll find out about it hopefully through the chapter or directly from the board. We'll have a piece in our newsletter too, so all architects see our newsletter. We're obviously willing to do whatever else we have in terms of avenues.
So they work at our office full-time? Like our-
Not full-time, it's a certain number of hours, 25 to 30 hours, and then we have the discretion to control it based
Per
upon.
week or per month?
Per week.
So I wanted to create basically diversity is part of the selection criteria. Not to myself.
In terms of educational background or in terms?
In terms of
Criteria.
criteria, anyway from genders and ethnic groups and all that.
Yeah.
The United States, other agencies have these criteria, just wondering the state has that.
It's primarily outreach because it's an OEO, equal opportunity employer. I mean, the state California's
Right.
EOE anyway, so they're not going to be allowed to discriminate. But what you're talking about is outreach.
Right.
And so you do want to get it to those groups, and they may not be in Sacramento, but you never know when.
Someone may want to
wants
move.
Yeah.
Oh, absolutely, we wouldn't want to not
It's a
have the
lot
statewide
cheaper
groups.
to
of
live in
the-
Sacramento. So, Yeah.
Thank you.
Okay. Enforcement actions, you see that the lion's share are Title Act violations, unlicensed practice, and I guess the good news is the number of citations regarding continuing education is indeed starting to diminish as we had hoped. The thought was, once the law's been on the books for a while, once the marketplace has fully absorbed the reality that there's CE that's required, a number of enforcement actions would decline. That's a good thing. And then enforcement statistic-wise, again, I'm really impressed with our numbers. There was a day not that long ago where our pending cases were 300 or above, and we're down to 72 currently. Additionally, our average days to close, most recent month was 158. Our goal is 270. So we're doing very well enforcement-wise, and having the big wave of continuing education cases cleared is going to help tremendously, because those were a lot of work initially, because we had to analyze types of violations and put our methodologies in place to address those. And then along with the report, you have your metrics on our enforcement program that explains in a little more detail the percentage of the various types of complaints we receive, number closed, number pending by fiscal year. Case aging on page 2, you can see that we're doing very well in that we don't have cases that go 3+ years. We've only got, I think, one that's 2 to 3. It comes down to the level of complexity. If you've got multiple parties, including a contractor, an engineer, et cetera, involved, public agencies, the investigations can be quite labor intensive to get you to where you go to a hearing. Any questions on enforcement or other items in the report?
On the, I don't have a page number here. Disciplinary and enforcement action by FY.
Yes.
Is this FY 16-17 is only few months compared with 15 and 16, which is 12 months? Is that
Correct.
right? Okay.
Yes.
So that's why the number's so low.
Precisely.
Okay.
And I'd like to go back to page 4, where the examination and licensing program. And again, I want to address that fail rate of over 50% on 2 of the portions of the test, which is the construction documents and services and program planning and practice. And I will continue to beat this drum until that number gets under 50%. I don't know how we address it, but it is significant that so many of our testings are failing in those 2 portions.
Are you talking about construction documents
And programming, planning, and practice. And that's at 52 and 54.
I think on top of that, like just across the board in all divisions, we're performing lower than the national average. And that's concerning too.
So is that a school education problem, or is that an intern problem? Or is it a both, a combination of both? I don't know, I'm not an architect, but it's definitely something to address, especially when we're trying to do the fast track. So I'm not sure what we can, or what we can do, or is this the place to discuss it?
Maybe a little bit. It's not agendized, but I guess 2 things. One, you do have a couple of schools here, so let's definitely ask some questions in terms of how the education and experience pieces are integrated with the exam component, because maybe that'll create some opportunity that would translate to better scores. The other is, and this was interesting to me, but NCARB actually reached out to test preparation vendors and conducted some sort of session where they brought the vendors in, briefed them about the exam. I mean, obviously not specific items, but process, how the test pen works, what the content areas are. With the goal being, let's help these test vendors at least be grounded in current reality, and maybe help their clients do a better job of preparing for the exams, and then of course that could translate to stronger scores. So that's just been rolled out recently. We'll have to see what it produces.
So do you think that having that conversation is going to have schools teach to test instead of teaching to the actual art of
Well, the conversation with the test vendors was NCARB's way of getting them on board to begin developing test prep materials for the new ARE 5.0, which they hadn't done before, but they want to make sure that they ramp up so when 5.0 gets launched, there's study materials available. And I think that was their goal, and it makes sense. I think it's an interesting topic that we might consider adding to our strategic planning discussion, because there's probably a lot of similarities between what happened in California and in every other state, because the test vendors are mostly nationwide, so the test vendors and the study materials and things are consistent. But it'd be interesting to have a conversation, maybe do some research and see if there's some things that are being done differently in other states as far as outreach by local AIA chapters or creation of study groups or assistance by universities to help students study or develop more study programs for them or something. And maybe there's some things that are being done elsewhere in the country that we're not doing here, and maybe by uncovering that, we can help incentivize improvement to that process.
So I was actually on the other side looking for similar issues and find some of the number maybe relates to the amount of candidates that decide to take the exams. So very interesting trending. USC is normally very strong, but this past year happened to be lots of students. For example, the subject that construction document, 103 is participating in the test, and their average score is a little lower. And UC Berkeley, only 18 candidates go out to the test, and their percentage is a little higher. So maybe something to do with the readiness of the candidate themselves. They say, I want to take a chance first, or maybe other group is more reserved and want to feel more prepared. So consider that factor as well. I'm just curious about these numbers because so they do kind of look into that. Very interesting.
Well, it was nice getting the information on, how everybody did in each individual school.
Yeah.
And you can see that, certain schools have strengths in certain areas and others have strengths in other areas. I'm sure they see those results, right? So, I don't know exactly what we can do to dictate to them, but that information's out there.
Yeah, it's clearly something we want to talk about more in strategic planning. I'll just share one note. I know that for certain types of schools, law schools, for example, they are actually required to publish their rates, so students coming into that school know, oh boy, pass rate's not really impressive if I go there. Maybe I should look at another school. I know that's kind of a dicey thing to bring up, but it is something other professions
It's
do.
not so dicey if we want to fast track and sort of our candidates are spending thousands and thousands and thousands of dollars to get educated and not be able to practice the craft that they want to have a career in. So I would explore that.
Just my own personal opinion. I think we're going to see something peculiar go on with scores in the coming years here after 5.0 launches. And the reason being is that 4.0 and every exam before 4.0 was essentially, can generally be described as content-based, content information-based. Whereas 5.0 is going to be more knowledge-based. So I think we're going to see something different occurring from these scores, because I think that what's going to happen, again, personal opinion, the quality and the professional maturity of licensed architects or newly licensed architects is going to trend upwards, but the number of architects passing the exam is maybe going to trend downward because of the preparation that's necessary to be well versed with the kinds of questions that are going to be asked in 5.0. I think at that point, the strength and the support to fill that gap, to create or develop more knowledge-based architects is going to have to come from a practice-based involvement, practice-based education opportunities that I don't think are as strong as they can be now. Just my own observations. I'd like to see how this all pans out over the next 3 years.
Yeah, I kind of tie that into too, because some of candidates may see that the exams change, lead to some challenges, and just go ahead and take the current one when he or she is not really ready to take, so that training is.
I can see that in some emerging professionals now, there's this rush to hurry up and try and get through 4.0 before 5.0 kicks in, because it's gonna be a different test. And you're gonna have to have this background and this knowledge, develop knowledge, or as I keep referring to it as professional maturity. So it'll be interesting to see, I think.
Plus, if I can add a comment too, when 5.0 launches, it'll take some time for scores to stabilize. So maybe after a period of time, you can re-examine it. And another point I think maybe we should make is for the California scores, because we have multiple pathways, you can become eligible to take the ARB not only with a college degree, so it could be all work experience. So within that candidate pool, there are the different pathways to becoming eligible. So when we're compared with the nation, it's not always apples to apples, so there is some variability.
Just another antidote to that is that because we have the pathway of those that become highly experienced, that there is that opportunity. They can accumulate years of experience and knowledge before taking the exam. I think it's going to be interesting to see and monitor how they do on the exam versus, the graduates from the universities. So there's a lot of dynamics that are going to occur over the next 5, 6, 7 years. I think
But
it'll
it's
be very
something
interesting to
you
watch.
don't examine, but it will take a while for it to stabilize.
And hopefully we're going to collect that data in a way that we can review.
We'll do what we can, but there are some limitations.
Well,
I
I'm
have
very,
a- I have a question about where the candidates from the schools, do we have data tracked down, are they the master's programs, or they the bachelor's program, or the average mix? For example, the Berkeley's candidate from Berkeley, only 9 people take the building system, for example, are they master's programs?
yes, he checked it, I
You
had
checked?
Mel checked it. Sorry, I can.
Or it's a mix of masters and
No,
bachelor's?
only.
Well, those are accredited programs.
Only accredited,
So anything listed is only accredited programs,
Correct.
whether it's by masters or.
Yeah.
When it lists them by each individual school, yes, those are the
Yeah.
accredited schools.
thank you, because I had the same question, and and Mel was able to check that for me, probably through you. But mine, I have sort of a bet, if you will. My sense about it, having taken the 5.0 as a test and failing miserably, but anyway.
Let's not dwell on it.
Yeah, that's not wrong, I'm not taking it personally. But anyway, when I took the sample test, it was so user-friendly that I think that you're gonna find that the knowledge will come through and not be bogged down by the software issues that they've had in 4.0 in previous versions. That's what I think. I didn't take 4.0 or earlier, so I don't know. I took the old-fashioned one, so I have no idea what these people went through, but my understanding is that it's a very un-user-friendly system.
Mostly the graphic components of vignettes were problematic. I think.
Exactly. So I think that, Nilda, let's wait and see, but I think we're gonna find, the scores may go up just purely on the fact that it is based on your knowledge and not based on your ability to work certain types of oddball software. And then the other thing, for Vicky's sake too, is that, I have been asked to sit on the committee that does the reviews of the initial group of tests. There's a technical term for it, which I can't remember, for this particular committee.
Scorecard.
Cut score?
Cut score.
Cut score, which is a very odd term I've never heard of, but anyway, I'm on that committee.
If you don't make the score, you get cut.
Yeah, cut score. So I'm on that committee, and so I'll be right there on the ground floor as the national test scores come in. So I will do my best to keep the board informed.
One final comment. And interesting that you pointed out on the scores, the favorable scores from Berkeley. We had a summit with all the schools about 3 years ago, maybe 2 years ago. And Berkeley made an interesting statement when we were just talking about the IPL. And they pretty much were stepping away from being involved in the initiative. But the interesting statement they made is that we teach architecture, we don't teach licensure. That may be coming out of their testimony, that's what I recall.
And if I may add to the report, nationally, though, if you look at our analysis, we're within 2 to 8%, depending on the individual division of the national level. So we're fairly competitive comparable to what candidates nationally are doing across the board in the divisions.
Very good.
That's still not good enough.
Well, is
That's
it-
like saying, well, I sort of passed the bar, but, no, we have to teach our students, specifically in California, to do better.
Is it a big enough strategic issue that we should really find a way to better understand the reasons behind the results, that we want to put it in our strategic planning discussions in some
If
way?
we're pushing licensure and ensuring that these students pass, yes,
Okay.
but if
Well,
that's not.
then,
priority.
then maybe I would suggest that we maybe add that to our strategic planning and see if there's more that we can do to better understand it, and if there's any suggestions that could come out that might be helpful.
Right, thank you.
Very good. Thank you.
And with that, okay, wrapped up the enforcement steps, so I believe there are liaison reports. Board members received our set of talking points and reminder regarding the liaison program. If you weren't able to make contact, we understand it's not easy, particularly sometimes with the community colleges to make contact. And so the plan is for this to feed into our strategic planning session for our next meeting and share what we've learned, and it'll serve sort of as a mini environmental scan as we come into strategic planning. So John, if you'd like, I could start since I have the first group, and I'll just run through all of mine. So the first one's the American Council of Engineering Companies, and they are a fairly significantly sized group with significant resources, so they get very involved with ballot measures. So they're deeply involved in the various bond measures that will be on our statewide ballot in November, but they also get involved in the local measures, particularly the transportation-based initiatives, and there's about 14 local measures that they're involved with. The other item legislatively for them is the indemnification clause issue, and I was sharing with John the joint letter the various design professional organizations sent. The bill did not make it through, so it will be a topic for legislation in 2017. And then lastly, ACEC is engaged in the diversity issue. They're actually forming a diversity council. They're doing some work with the various caucuses in the legislature. On this point, they're going to hold some type of reception during their legislative day. I've been asked to participate in one of their early working group sessions to see where the opportunities are with state government, with the educational institutions, et cetera. So it'll be interesting to see what their launching point ends up becoming, and then we can share that with AI and figure out what our role wants to be as a licensing board. So those are the items for ACEC. For the licensing board for engineers, they recently received the statutory authority to require fingerprinting for new licensees. So they use the live scan system, and new licensees go through that process. When someone's record is run, if there's a criminal record that was forwarded from the Department of Justice, the board has to review it and determine appropriate action based upon the type of violation. So engineers is just commencing the implementation of that system. In terms of Breeze, engineers is in the same phase that we are, so there might be an opportunity to work with them in terms of business process planning, kind of share some of our experiences we've had in our respective processes, and figure out the best way to get it rolled out when it's ready. All of their exams have now been transitioned to computer-based testing, so they're consistent with what we do in that regard. Lastly, the contractors board, the major issue for them is an enforcement issue, and it has to do with solar. There are a lot of consumer scams going in the marketplace with solar. Some of them have to do with how you lease the equipment, a number of different angles that bad actors can utilize to rip consumers off. And then the other issue, and this is one we're quite familiar with, on the heels of the balcony disaster in Berkeley where all the students were killed, settlement reports was a major topic in the legislature this year. Contractors are not required to file settlement reports to the licensing board. Legislation was introduced by Senator Hill, the chair of the Business and Professions Committee. The bill was amended, and it's largely a study bill now to come up with recommendations for the next legislative year. I was asked to participate in a workshop that was held at Contractors Board to explain our requirements. The Engineers Board was at the table with me. And when the bill came to the Senate Business and Professions Committee, Senator Hill's staff asked me to testify, as well as the Engineers Board, to explain our requirements and how they work. So it'll be interesting to see what the study uncovers and what type of provisions might be in legislation going forward. And then lastly, the building official group. I have 4 groups actually. The statewide group is called, they call themselves CALBO, California Building Officials. 2 of their main initiatives have to do with training on an ongoing basis. Given the recent code adoption cycles, they're doing training and seminars for inspectors, planners, examiners, building officials. Legislatively, they're trying to work proactively to establish relationships early in the legislative year with legislators, staff, as well as industry stakeholders. And then the other piece, it's part training, but it sounds to me like succession planning. They're really working to do more training in the field within the industry, within local government, to train the future generation of building department staff. So those are my 4 groups.
Great. My focus has been primarily working with the New School of Architecture in San Diego. And their focus has been the implementation of the ITAL program, as several other campuses are. And probably the biggest strategic effort that's going on right now is engaging the professional community and participating in that program with them. So, creation of some oversight committees made up of local practitioners, going through the discussion process of how to logistically implement the internship programs and shadowing programs and things of that nature, and get buy-in within the professional community, which in the long run is really going to be one of the key factors in the success of the ITAL programs, is engaging that professional community. There's another program that's going on statewide that's also engaging some of the schools, in particular the new school in San Diego is the Coalition for Adequate School Housing. A few years ago created a student design competition program to get students involved in, as a part of their curriculum, the design of schools and submittal of those, and then there's an awards program for those who are selected as winners, and they're flown to Sacramento for their annual conference, and they get a little bit of ceremony associated with their award. But it involves getting local practitioners involved with those studios and helping mentor and guide some of that work with the students. So it's really the connection between the education and then the profession that's happening on a much more aggressive scale right now, and I'm really happy to see that. I think the more we have of that, the more we'll begin to really address some of the issues we talked about earlier about career readiness for students when they come out of school. Okay, Matt, you want to take the next one?
Yeah, sure. So I've got a few new names to give Mel for people that have changed positions. The only group I was really able to get in touch with is City College of San Mateo. Had a nice conversation with the gentleman running that program, John Casey. He was concerned about the board's approach towards multiple class to licensure. He wanted to make sure that that's going to continue in California, and I assured him that that's something we're very strong on. I asked him about his transfer and articulation agreements with colleges. He said they used to have one with Cal Poly. Cal Poly changed everything 7 or 8 years ago, and so now they no longer have that transfer agreement. But they do have one with Berkeley that they feel is very strong, and he says that their better students end up going and graduating from Berkeley. They also send kids to USF and a few other schools, but they don't actually have an articulation program. So those kids have to work out what classes are going to transfer and what aren't. He said that he asked if we would be willing to send a board member or a staff member to one of their local AIA chapters to give updates, on maybe an annual basis as to what the board is doing, kind of similar to the phone call. But he wanted to find out if that was something that we would participate in. And he does want to supply bookmarks. So that was something that was offered to at least the community colleges, if not all. But that's something we need to talk to Mel about. So that kind of concludes my communication. Gentlemen, tried to reach one guy from West Valley College for the last 2 or 3 years. Looked him up, really capable guy. For an architect, I don't know if that has something to do with why he's not responding, or maybe where his role is, I don't know, just conjecture at that point. But haven't been able to get through to him. The city college guy changed, and I don't bother with the Associated General Contractors of California anymore. After trying to reach them a few times, finally threatening, you know, to say it worked, but it didn't lead to a good relationship. So lesson learned. But we didn't really have a very productive conversation last time we spoke. So if you do have somebody else, I can reach out to.
I've got someone for you.
Okay, perfect.
Well, you're speaking the language, I understand it.
Yeah, absolutely.
Okay, that's well.
Yeah, I don't really have a lot of updates. The general consensus from most of the folks that I engage with are very interested to see how the IPEL program is going to take hold. As some of you know, both Norm Millar and I were on the LA, or the task force, licensure task force for NCARB. So Norm was a colleague and a champion and a friend, very much so, that helped shape the future of this, of the acceptance of the IPEL program. So fortunately, we have Catherine here today, so rather than give a report, when the time comes, Catherine will give us the update on what Woodbury is doing at the program, because I think that's where there's a lot of focus and eyes on the schools that have engaged.
So I have a different approach now, and I was thinking about sharing with you what I've been doing lately so that you guys might want to consider trying this methodology, since calling them and beating your head against the wall doesn't seem to work very well. So what I've been doing for the past couple of cycles is I've been giving them, sending my 6 liaisons, 6 people, an email. And in it I put the most salient and relevant points of the day, if you will. Give them links to all the different sites. So in this particular email I sent them, I talked about AXP, the ARE 5.0, and of course the licensure upon graduation issue, and then finally the title change. And so now that the governor vetoed, which I hope we're going to talk about, right, sometime today. I'm sure we're going to hear all about that, but since the governor vetoed the title, I don't know what to call it except the Title Act, whatever you want to call it. I'm now using that as an excuse to email them again, just maybe a week later, and say, hey, in fact, I already sent one today saying, guess what we found out, and if you have any more questions. And so I got a good reply already from one of the guys, which is he is the new dean or chair of the architecture department at CCA, California College of the Arts. Never had ever gotten a call back from him, and I left him voice notes, but he responded to my email. It said, thank you so much, I'm going to share it with this professor and that professor. And so based on that, what I'm doing now with my emails, I'm saying, please share with all your faculty members. And see, it's so simple to do that because they just have to hit a button. Instead of these phone calls, which, they're great when you have them, they really are, but they're few and far between, and they're very frustrating on everybody's side, about waiting for phone calls to come back, return phone calls and so forth. So if any of you are interested, let me know and I'll forward you a copy of what I sent. And
I would love it.
Great, because it really, and what I did was, by the way, I just did my own search to say what links give you the most succinct description of what's going on. So I would search, find the ones that were the most relevant and easiest to understand, and then just link it to him. So it seems to be working. I mean, I only got one email back, but hey, that's better than zero. And now I'm gonna try the second email and see if I can draw in a few more responses. So we'll see what happens.
That's a great idea.
Yeah, we'll see.
We're gonna give you a raise.
$55
Is that it? Okay, Jan, I think you're next. Yes?
Can I add something that, because it was brought up about trying different things? I also tried something, and it seems, it may be successful, I'm not sure. But what I did is I sent a letter. Remember those things? I sent a letter to the contacts, and I said, Pasquale Gutierrez liaison to, California Architects Board liaison to name of the institution. Then followed the email. And then go, yeah, got your letter. You know, so, might try that too.
Did you get any responses?
Yeah, well, with the email. But
Yeah.
everybody responds and works on email now. Nobody talks on the phone.
Yeah.
Nobody.
That's what I'm,
But the letter's kind of, it's a kind of an unexpected thing, you know. Maybe I'll try postcards next time.
There's a little tear off coupon.
Yeah.
They can redeem.
Some-
there you go.
Yeah?
Sure, I have a quick one too. So I normally send out the email with highlights. I now call them an annual outreaching from the State Architects Board. So, and then follow up a phone call. And then one of the institutes still not being not responsive, Chabot College, but I had a very good meeting and conversation with UC Berkeley again, with the chair, Tom Rush. Conversation cannot avoid an iPod. So he has an interesting perspective I want to share and on board to consider too. First of all, he always cites the entire institute says we're not sure we can be teaching to the test. Right? That's a famous quote. And also we have a very, very much broad interest on students to pursue beyond architecture, non-architecture, architecture school. So, but I did point, even you're interested in how it is not mandatory, it's just an option for the students, right? So the other students can still pursue other career afterwards. But I think what his concern is, for the 4 years program, every semester is so maxed in terms of students' workload, including the summers. They all have overseas programs, whatever program it is, have very little mechanical and maneuver room for the school even thinking about introduce different curriculums. So that's interesting perspective. And the two is, he said, if we can successfully teach our students and our passing rate is good, can our students to actually take advantage of other schools that enroll IPOL and also start taking exam early. So I consulted with Doug. Of course, I don't think we're in position to respond to that. And because if you don't have any curriculum modifications or changes geared towards IPOL, and how can we evaluate that request, right? But nevertheless, I think if this is twice, the second year now he made this request, can their students also start taking exams early? So, I think the last one was interesting that he feel pretty good that their passing rate is high. But again, that's why I asked question on confirm. So they are candidates that on the record is a master's program candidates. They are more take more classes and more years in the schools and perhaps more selected when they enter the master's program. So you consider that their passing rate is slightly high. So with that said, he seems not very satisfied for the fact that a school like UC Berkeley and their students cannot take advantage of this IPOL, although they're not a part of pilot, but taking exam early. So I just want 2 years in a row that he's saying this, I want to report to the board. And then go back to the Apple Valley College, there was another interesting conversation this year. We also met in person. I think the one highlights I get from this conversation is last year they were focused on how successful they were to help their students transfer to UC Berkeley and California. They have agreement with two institutes. They designed a course to support that transition. But this year, one of the senior instructors, in addition to the chair, stated further. And she said it's two aspects. She sees community college can get involved with IPAL and BEA, Broader Experience Architect. One is, since many of their classes qualify for the university credit, is it possible, I see Michael here, is it possible when the university design modifying their courses for their IPAL, and some of these courses made it at the level that the college can offer, so the college made a contribution to this transition to IPAL. That's a very interesting concept. And another one, she feels that for the majority of students, by the way, it's majority of students not pursuing transfer to universities. Looks like we left them, unguided. And she was suggesting can board or other institute that do something that is more clear to the students that, particularly in California for them, they have opportunities. We have broadly experienced architects. You don't need to go to the college. I mean, you don't have to have that bachelor's degree credit. And with an AA degree, you can pursue that. But that was not a clear path to these students. So she's asking for help to reach out, and because that's the majority of the students' population. I thought that was an interesting competition this year.
Denise?
My three schools are Glenville Community College, Rio Hondo Community College, and UCLA. Over the past year, I've reached out to all three. There was a change at UCLA, so the information that we have in the information that was provided, that one's, I don't think is no longer there, or it's incorrect. It might have a new dean. But I've emailed and called and haven't heard back from anyone. And in one case, one of my colleagues is on the board of Glendale Community College, so I thought that CCing the board member might make a difference, but it didn't. No update.
So much for pulling rank. Devin?
So I emailed all my programs. USC, I emailed back and forth with the assistant dean, Gail, but we always have Charles here. So they have also he was appreciative. I did the email with all the updates, and he was appreciative with the updates and was going to share with the professors and email me back if they had any updates. But they also have a really strong relationship with East LA, which is another program with Michael Hamner. He's an alum from USC. I did not get connected with him this time, but I did do a visit before. And I'm not really worried about them. They do have a strong relationship with the architect community. They have their own advisory board, and many of their students transfer over to USC. Citrus College, I previously connected with Richard, which is one of the chairs, but I did this time email the dean and left him a voice message, and I didn't get connected. LA Valley College is one of my programs, and I think that's the program I would be most concerned with. When I spoke with them previously, I spoke with a professor who just said that the students weren't really engaged or prepared. So I think the best approach for me is to do tours of the schools, because I think when they see you in person first, then it's easier to connect moving forward. I had the opportunity, even though it's not one of my schools, to do a tour of SciArc. And at the time that I did the tour, they have their high school students on campus, and they have a very strong diverse pipeline program. Diversity is one of their missions. I did see a lot of international students that were young high school students coming to their summer program. And there's a lot of women or girls that were part of it, and it was nice to see the diversity in the room and the students and teachers that were committed to that program. They also had college students, a different program. I think they give them a little stipend for college students to come for SciArc during summer as well. And so I would like to just see how we can look at the programs that do have a strong pipeline program and apply that or support the other schools that may not have as many resources. So I'm gonna try to focus on Valley College and do a tour of it.
I also have had no success. However, my assistant Janet and I are trying to figure out when they have office hours and schedule it for me to show up. Yeah, to show up, to try to figure out when it works with White's calendar, and then we're just gonna just show up and then figure it out. I'm here.
Kicking the door.
Yeah.
Doing your design with, so,
Yes.
and great.
I'll videotape it so you can. So that's, I have nothing to share, because I've got no copy.
That's right.
Like it escaped.
I have nothing to report about the other Douglas. I'll get some lays and assignments from those.
Well, that's a good point. We typically hold off on our new board members simply because we don't want to pull groups away from board members who have really built a strong connection. But when we turn over, or maybe somebody has too many, they only have some off, we'll figure out the best fit for you, Bob.
Can I just insert one? Apparently, one college has architecture degree not listed. I don't know, according to DEC. I don't know if we're looking into it. It's City College of San Francisco.
Oh.
They have architecture degree.
Very strong.
It should be on there.
Yeah, no, I thought
we
that.
have
Oh, you
Yeah, they just changed people though.
Oh.
So I've reached out to the new guy and he hasn't come back. The old guy took a little while to let me know who the person was.
I have a question, like, is there someone else we should reach out to the dean? And I'm thinking about UCLA where the dean is like internationally renowned, so he's probably ignoring my email or, is there someone else that in the structure of the university that we should reach out to?
Let us look into that for the NAB schools, because there might be an associate dean who might not be dealing with the faculty chair anyway, so there might be a menu of folks for an institution of that size.
For USC, my dean's always traveling, so I got a good relationship with the front desk. And so they transferred me over to ours.
I'm sure Mars traveling or he's.
Yeah, he's always traveling.
Nice.
Okay, thank you. Then you want to take on the legislative update?
I will, and since we have strategic planning at our very next board meeting, and if the board has the desire to do anything legislatively, that would be the place to really talk about it, strategize about how we would want to do it. But obviously, we have a lot invested in Senate Bill 1132 after the June board meeting. Pursuant to the discussion there, we convened a special working group to look at the language and identify the best pathway. Prior to that, staff rolled up its sleeves and did a lot of work identifying 4 different possible models, actually drafting the legislative language, working with legal counsel to fine tune it. Then we went to the working group, and from there we had the teleconference special board meeting just on the bill. AI as the sponsor facilitated the amendments being inserted into the bill through legislative council. The bill made it to the governor's desk and it was vetoed yesterday. I've got the message here, and essentially what the message is, it references the fact that NCAR concluded there's not a need for a title other than architect in order to protect consumers, and the governor concurs with that statement. There's a history or there are precedents with the administration on pilot act bill to certify athletic trainers, for example, that was vetoed. And so that's where we are today. We're on record supporting, we collaborated, we crafted language, so we should talk about it in December. It's going to be up to AI as to whether they wish to reintroduce it, wait for the next governor, or do something else. So I'm sure we'll hear more. Do you guys have plans already, or or talk in December?
I can't really say because we'll have a new executive committee, a new board of directors by that time. So it's hard for me to say exactly what the council's going to do in 27 months for this administration. So it's difficult to say. I would guess that if the interns had their way, if the AEP, the emergency professionals, it would be yes, take another run at it. So I will take my direction from the leadership of the AIACC.
So you'll know more for December? or-
Yes.
So in the meantime, Doug and John, in the meantime, what will these people call themselves in California?
Whatever their firm tells
They
them.
can
It's not
call
regulated.
themselves whatever they want, anything other than architect.
There are a whole list of titles in the AIA Professional Practice Manual, salary survey. Every firm's going to be different. The other items, Senate Bill 1195, and Michael's going to give you a, shall I call it a briefing on the North Carolina case? Not here, but he will discuss the North Carolina case with you. This is the bill that would have crafted a statutory legislative solution to the Supreme Court, holding a lot of work from the Attorney General's office, from Department of Consumer Affairs, from the legislative leadership. Ultimately, the bill did not make it through and will likely be reintroduced next year. I couldn't tell you what it's going to look like. That reality is going to be above our pay grade. It will be determined by the department and the other main stakeholders. And then lastly, Senate Bill 1479 is a cleanup measure from the Business and Professions Committee, and it contains our cleanup measure as to the IPAL programs. Essentially what our fix is we've taken out the proper name, IPAL, because NCARB is now, hopefully they're not watching, they've changed the name of the program like 4 times, so we gave up trying to amend our statute to be consistent, and now we refer to the degree types generically.
And I don't believe we're actually looking for any action on these, are we?
Correct.
Okay. The only thing I would highlight is the issue with the 1195 bill, even though that it didn't go forward now, it really highlights the issue that came out of North Carolina, which is important for us to keep on our radar screen, and that is that we're here to regulate consumer protection and regulation of the practice of architecture from a licensing standpoint. We're not here to deal with competitive issues or marketplace issues or commerce, those types of issues. So as questions come up, and we get them periodically from architects who think the board can help with an issue, most of the time it has to do with, the most recent was, contract language and things of that nature, or procurement strategies by public agencies and things like that. We usually punt those over to the council because that's really in their bailiwick, and it is not ours, and we should be really diligent to make sure that we're evaluating requests or issues that come before us and making sure that we're not trying to step into that arena where we're not authorized to step. Okay. Yeah, update on NCRB.
So we have 2 items for you under NCARB. One is the mutual recognition agreement between the U.S., New Zealand, and Australia, and it mirrors other MRAs, we call them, that we have with other nations, somewhat similar to the one we have with Canada. Keep in mind that this board has already approved supporting this, and we voted on it at the annual meeting. So this is the next step to effectuate it. This authorization, this vote from you today would authorize us to actually formally sign the document. In fact, John could do it immediately after the vote if you so desire. So that's what's for.
And then this really creates a two-way street between U.S. architects and those in Canada, like we have in Canada, for those in New Zealand and Australia. So with some minimal certain professional qualifications, a U.S. architect can practice and get licensed to practice there, just as an Australian architect can get licensed to practice here.
I have some information to share with the board and then have a question as well. So I was, for family reasons, visiting Australia, and I stopped by in New Zealand, and I had the opportunity to unofficially meet with the counterpart there, as I know some professor who happened to be on their New South Wales State Board. So the Australia system is, their state is so in line with the national board, the Australia Architecture Accredited Board, that is no, unlike us, for example, state of California have supplementary exams even you have NCOP. So then they can see this implementation in this day, and it looks like they sit there. Okay, if your side is ready and we're ready. So, so that's something I thought it's not so identical to us, right? We California has a slightly different requirement, and each state has different requirement. So how can we, as a state, actually implementing this as a part of the national effort? So I'd like the board to discuss on that. And the New Zealand side different, like the country is so small, and almost like the country is the state is the country. They say, wow, that's they're ready. And so I thought this is interesting to bring back to this board. And I happen to be Kate Doyle, happen to be the signator of the document with NCOM. She did that the officer with it. So anyway, that's information for the board.
Correct me if I'm wrong, the mutual recognition agreement allows a candidate from Australia to receive an NCARB certificate.
Correct.
Not a license to practice in a jurisdiction. They're still subject to every one of the 54 jurisdictions to actually get a license. So they could receive an NCARB certificate, they could come to California, they would be subjected to the same requirements that someone coming from Iowa. They'd take the CSE before they could be licensed.
That's the part I like have a good understanding. So as we as a board to support that, that's the based on assumption that Australia Architects is receiving NCOP certificates, but not immediately receiving a license from state of California.
Correct.
That's important clarification.
So with that, a motion might want to be authorization for the board president to sign the MRA.
Is there a motion to do that?
I'll move.
Okay, so we have moved that we authorize the president to sign the mutual recognition agreement.
I'll second.
Seconded. Any other comments or questions? Okay, take a roll call vote.
Okay, John Baker.
Aye.
Denise Campos.
Yes.
Ken Finn.
Aye.
Oscar Terrace.
Yes.
Sylvia Kwan, yes. Ebony Lewis.
Yes.
Matt McGinnis.
Yes.
Robert Pearman.
Yes.
Nils Serrano.
Aye.
Very good, motion passes.
We can wait.
All right, this minute.
Where did we go?
He's efficient.
So he doesn't change his.
He's on it. The ink is still wet.
Yeah, tell me which one I'm supposed to sign on. I think you have a second NCARB issue.
I do,
We can address this later.
that is simply the ICAL report. So we have folks from both Woodbury and USC. So alphabetical order.
Ladies first.
Ladies first.
She did first.
Thank you all for coming.
Okay, well, let me introduce myself. I'm Catherine Roussel. I am the Career and Outreach Coordinator at the School of Architecture, both here in LA and in San Diego. And when you had your meeting at our school, was it the last meeting or before that? We all presented our different programs. So you may remember that we have a B-ARC that becomes a 6-year from a 5-year to a 6-year, and they work the entire 5th year, and then complete the degree in the 6th year. And we just also in the second round of NCARB applications, our MR program is now part of the ICAL approved by NCARB. So, but our BARC, we've already moved forward on that. We've had 10 students work this past summer. They're all enthusiastic. We've got agreements with firms. And for the most part, that all worked out. We've worked it out so that they can complete the 3,740 hours in the time frame. So one student said she completed close to 600 hours this summer. But so they're all enthusiastic, they all have different experiences with different firms.
So when did the program actually launch at your Woodbury?
Well, I could also add that we had a competitive process, so students had to apply to us, we interviewed them. Then that was all earlier this year. Then we sent those applications, their packets from each student to firms, some packets to each firm in our consortium. And then once the student was hired, it's ultimately up to the firm to hire the student, then they started working. So they started working this summer. And,
Before they start classes?
This was after they completed a year of school at Woodbury.
Okay.
Sorry if I didn't make that.
No, I think you said that. I must have missed that.
Well, in our 6-year program, they would start after the 2nd year. But in fact, some of our students were first year. So they had been through one entire year of school. And so they're already students when they apply to be in the IPEL program.
So you don't have the initial requirement, in other words, they can start first year or second year, or they must complete the course.
Well, that was an interesting thing. We definitely said it was going to be after the 2nd year. But then we had students that seemed like great candidates, so we were flexible about it.
So you like to have a mix of these students? Some students already start first year and some students start third year in your current program? 10 of them?
Well, now our initial cohort will keep moving forward. So that group, some are in their 3rd year now, some are in their 2nd year now. That will be the group that continues. They'll be the first ones to complete. We'll be having another call for applications from our students in the early spring. And the only thing we will do differently is be earlier, because that became an issue with some of the firms that had already had interns lined up.
Well, this was the initial.
Right, it took us a little longer to figure out each step. Like, we have an agreement with students, the students sign an application to. We can't guarantee them a position with the firm. It's still up to the firm to hire. We have an agreement with each firm. Essentially, our expectation is that we have a supervisor identified in each firm, and that they will help get the student through each AXP experience area. That would be help guide them, assure that we could get through. And so, of course, the people were not too worried about the first year because it could be any area. And then it could get tighter and tighter toward the end to make sure they are getting all those experience areas. But on the flip side, I think some firms were not sure what to give them. So I think this is an interesting dialogue. They didn't have some of the skills they were used to, like rendering, and also we don't plan to change the curriculum. But our 2nd year students already have their first practice course in the 2nd year. So they already have some of the skills that the firms will be looking for, either Revit or some other AutoCAD, and some knowledge of construction software.
So you're merely adding the practice time into the...
That's right, we're just adding practice time, and then of course we are anticipating that we'll have to prepare for the exams.
Have you worked with the firm, the co-op firms, to define the kind of experience area, or you let the firm decide?
The firms decide, because so I'm in the process of getting feedback. I've sent surveys to all our students, and how they feel about it. Do they want to continue with the same firm? Are they excited? Do they want to keep continuing? Do they have any feedback for the firm? So the one feedback was just start earlier. Some want to stay with the same firm, some want to try something else. We have not surveyed the firms yet, but we have the survey, it just hasn't gone out yet to get some feedback from firms.
It sounds like you're getting pretty good participation from firms, so all your students are finding placement.
Yes, we had one student who did not get it this summer, and but it was because we were so late that two firms were not able to participate in San Diego one day. And one firm in San Diego hired 2 students. That was a nice surprise. And then up in the LA area, we had 8 firms and 8 students, and it just, they all fit together. Each firm, each student found a firm. Or vice versa. Each,
As your enrollment grows over the coming years, do you feel confident that you'll be able to?
Yeah, so one of our questions in the survey to the firms is, are you prepared to take 2 this coming summer? Because you could have a continuing and a new person, and then you have this nice mentoring levels. And, or do you just want to stay with one? Do you want to stay with the same one, or are you open to any? And, but I think after the first summer, those students are already ahead. By the second summer, why wouldn't you want to hire them, right? If you're the firm, they're already much more prepared and able to work in a firm. So that's what I'm now telling firms. Because it's not just a summer intern, it's
one idea that it just came to my mind as you were talking about this pairing, because it's not going to work out perfect every year, right? You were more or less fortunate it worked out because economy is good, people are hiring. So here's an idea that I sort of got from what Cal Poly San Luis Obispo did. What they did is it's a special program, but you can sort of adapt it. What they do is every spring they have a studio in San Francisco in particular, okay? But you can just choose. I mean, just say somewhere. But Cal Poly students don't live in San Francisco; they live in San Luis Obispo. But with this program, what the professor says is, okay, I'm going to take X number of students for this program, and you're going to live in the Bay Area, and I'm going to pair you up with a firm in the Bay Area, but you are responsible for all the housing. And so what happens is that they self-select. So practically everyone we've had, because we've had them now for about 3 years, they all have an uncle, a cousin, an aunt, a grandparent. They all have somebody that they can stay with for a semester. I would say 0% of the people that we've had, the students we had, actually paid for housing. They actually, because, like I said, they're self-selecting. So they can go somewhere else if they can.
So you're suggesting to
widen
open
your
up
net.
to different geographical areas. Yes, Professor Woodbury suggested that to us too, just not necessarily for IPEL, but just for our internships. But
Precisely.
I think it's
just think about
what to consider. Yes.
So the 10 students lost, what the percentage of that year's students population? 10%, 20%?
That's a good question. I am not positive, but we have about 500 students altogether, but including interior architecture, LA, San Diego, between 400 and 500, let's say. So each class maybe 60. Of course, each class is different, so I'm afraid I can't answer that very precisely.
I have a couple of questions. You said you have approximately 400 to 500 students. How many of those are diverse? Do you know? Different ethnicities or is it?
Yes. Well, we're a Hispanic Serving Institute, so there's a percentage of Hispanic. We have diversity.
What does
does
We have
that mean?
some
What would
answers.
be your percentage? Do you have a percentage?
Well, I can't answer that very well either, but I know at one point, and NAB was asking for the report, a diversity plan. I don't know if we have that, but the goal of that was that our diversity should reflect the community we're in. I think we do. We have a lot of local students from California, from the San Fernando Valley, Armenian population.
And how many of your total students are international students?
That I also can't answer exactly, and I'm not prepared to answer those
Okay.
questions.
It's just for
Prepared-
information,
prepared-
I'm
prepared
just
on my
curious
page,
to
but,
see.
um,
And out of people that apply to your program, how many applications would you say you receive on a yearly basis now that your program is up and running? For people that want to come in and be part of your system?
To
the program?
IPAL program or to our program?
To your program as a whole. So
The
how many
acceptance
applications a
rate?
year do you get approximately? You know, do you get 500 applications and only 50 slots, or do you get 50 applications and 50 slots?
Could I get back to you on some of these questions?
Absolutely, absolutely.
Okay.
That's just
Take a
me.
note.
You're just gonna have to bring more data.
I'm just curious because I just.
Really, I think, I see you're looking for a profile of our school, and I'd be happy to provide that.
Thank you so much. Thank you.
Catherine, you mentioned that you also implement this for the MR program.
Yes, we just,
Are you going to talk about it?
well, oh, yes, let me just tell you that it would have to be a 4-year, so from a 3-year to a 4-year time frame to get all those AXP hours done. And the only difference is, well, I think one difference, you work during the summer, you work a whole year, but the way it works out is the last part of what you're doing is work versus school. And I have diagrams for these. I have diagrams with me. They're just not. I can show you on my laptop if anyone would like to see.
It's simple to say if I have EARC for that 6 years degree, what additional units or years, maybe 1 more years to get the MR?
Well, it would be a normal 3-year MR would be 3 years, so you're adding a year. So it would only work with the 3-year. It could work with a 2-year MR if they had experience already.
All right, I'd like to give Michael a little bit of time. Catherine.
Yes, I'm.
Thank-
Thank you.
This group will keep you up there and grill you all day long. All right, thank you, Catherine.
Thank you.
John, can I ask
Information
for
gathering.
Nielsen asked some questions on diversity. I just want to let you know, just as a matter of collecting data, we have 3 Woodbridge graduates. One's Hispanic, one is Vietnamese, and one is Egyptian. So 2
And
males,
are
1
those
female.
international students or are they locally USA-based students?
One of those.
There's at least 67 other nationalities that are not represented in that, so you're not doing a very good job.
So, being that Professor LaGreca is not here, I'm going to throw him under the bus on several things. First of all, there's typos about AXP and APX.
I mean, it should be AXB.
It should be it, I think.
It's okay.
All right, so first of all, I'm Michael Lisak. I teach at USC. And although I'm not the person at USC really in charge of this program at the faculty level, I am the NCAR liaison, architectural licensing advisor, pro-practice teacher person. So I get all those questions. So we've introduced the program this year, and this is the way we've done it. It's sort of been a soft rollout. So we're giving presentations to the various years of students, starting with the freshmen. We are explaining the program. Now, it's easier to explain it to people in their third and fourth year than it is their first year because they don't know what hit them, these poor 18-year-olds. So it's a slightly different presentation. Tremendous amount of interest at a general level. If nothing else comes out of these presentations, just the fact that they get their NCARB record going, I consider it a success, whether they'll sign up for this or not. I mean, just the idea of start that first step, getting over the inertia of the first step. So that's a big thing, and that's kind of the takeaway from those meetings. Like, did you do this? Did you sign up? Did you get? So we're giving a series of rollouts, not an overall school thing because it's too big. People don't like to ask questions, especially you're in a new environment and you have no idea what the speaker's talking about. So that's the way we're doing it. Now, so we're asking people to declare at the end of this semester, no matter what year it is. So there's a year to ask me questions. If they're in my classes, it's easy. If they're not, so I think as a pro practice teacher, I think we teach pro practice too late. We usually across the board, across most schools I know, pro practice is taught like, oh, there's something you should know. We forgot to tell you. Sit down. So we're trying to work. That's a cultural thing. But that's across the board because I go to these NCAR meetings, the national NCAR meetings, and there's a lot of people there that are involved in this. They're involved in pro practice. Not a lot there that are involved in this rollout program. 14, or is it 19 now? Are there more schools? Just 14, right?
Yeah, 3, right?
I think they added some.
Well, they had several more candidates this year. I forget what the total numbers now.
18, did you say?
Yeah.
iPhone programs?
Yeah.
Yeah, there were 14 and then they added 4. And those are degrees, by the way, not new schools.
Oh. Okay, so at SC, we had baked into the school a couple of things that make this pretty, I don't want to say effortless, but easy for us. One is this support group that's called the Architectural Guild, which is a support group. It's firms like this, it's Turner and Morley, and so it's across the industry, across the profession and the industry. So we've got engineers, architects, some are SC alumni, some are just there for networking. So we've got that group. We have a annual firm fair, 60 companies show up typically, and so the placing of the students is pretty easy for us. And we've presented this to the Guild. They're wildly enthusiastic about it, and when they're contractors, so when they're wildly enthusiastic, they mean it. So I'm not saying that the contractors are hiring them, although we do have that. We have a fair amount of contractors show up to our firm fairs. But so we've got general acceptance and just tell us what you need attitude from the Guild. Number 2 is Doug Noble, the famous and unbelievable Dr. Noble at USC, started something years ago for which he's been honored across the country, called Not Licensed Yet, Not Late, which SC has stepped into the void. The local chapter stopped doing the ARE seminars for a while, and Doug says, well, okay, we'll do it. And we've got the facilities, we've got a captive group of teachers, and then instructors so it was set up as a support group for recent grads and emerging professionals to come back, create some kind of camaraderie, study for the exam. And so that's been in place for a decade. So the fact that we can just plug our students into an ongoing, well-oiled machine is no small thing. And so between the Guild and Notley, we've got quite an infrastructure for this. I heard someone say teaching to the test. There's always that. We're going to have a faculty retreat. I'm going to give a presentation like this. And, you know, everyone's going to say, what about teaching to the test? I said, you can't teach to the test. You don't know what's on the test. So, and you wouldn't teach to it anyway. However, what we're doing with students is guiding them as to, you know, it would be good to take this portion of the exam this year, or just knowing what they're, you know, because the curriculum is pretty structured. And just like Woodbury, we're not changing the curriculum. The curriculum remains the same. There's enough flexibility in the curriculum to support this effort. So, and by the way, they don't have to do it the way we suggest they do it, but that's part of the mentoring from the institution side. Ours is, I was going to say, not unlike, it's exactly like Woodbury's. Our undergraduate there's a gap year, you know, so between fourth and fifth year, that becomes a full-time year. And then we graduate basically in 6 years, and if everything goes well, you're licensed soon thereafter. What we're finding, and we've had a graduate program for a long time. We've had a +1 and a +2, and we've got this sort of salad bar of degrees. So now we have a genuine +3, meaning that you could study French Lit and come to SC and get a master's degree in 3 years. Now what's interesting, and I teach a lot of those students, and what we're finding is that these archaeology majors or economics majors have been working for architects or contractors or surveyors or engineers. They actually have all their time. They had all their time before they started at SC because someone told them about the old IDP. And so it's an interesting hybrid. Now there's the model that we share, which someone from knowing nothing about the process, but there are people, you know, their uncles and architects. So we're finding that we might have a lot more interest in this than we originally thought. And it might have to be curated a lot less than we thought because, you know, the knowledge flows amongst the candidates. Now, a couple of questions I have, and Nav is going to be at, NCARB is going to be at SC Monday night, and I think someone from here, Tim Rada?
Yes.
Yes. He's not
here.
But he'll be
there.
So NCARB is coming Monday night. Tim will join them, and we'll get our questions answered. Like for instance, if my first question is, okay, I got an NCARB certificate. I go to SC. I want to sign up for the exam. Is that process in place at the NCARB level? I mean, do we have some kind of stamp of approval that this person? So I don't know, but I'll get those answers on Friday. I mean on Monday. Students who declare, you know, during our open enrollment period, who declare will get priority with the firms that are part of the guild effort, and also, you know, there are a lot of people that go to architecture school don't like to be told what to do. So, you know, actually, I think everyone that goes to architecture school doesn't like that. So, you know, there'll be people that go out and they'll find their own internships, and that's fine. And just, you know, they know uncles and aunts and whatever. That's my questions.
I have questions, obviously. You've probably heard the questions that I had before, but in your program, how many students, what's your diversity rate?
Oh, well, define what level?
How many women, how many Latinos, how many Black, how many?
52%.
There's how many?
52%.
Great, and are those, in your entire program, how many are USA students versus international students? Yeah, what's your rate of international?
I would say over 50%.
Are international, okay. So over 50%, 59, 50?
You mean?
Over 50%, would it be closer to 60?
No, I'd say it's close to 50. I'd say it's close to 50.
And because we're finding in some of our schools that our students are not able to go into a graduate program or into a program of architecture because some of the spots are being filled by international students. And I understand why you do it, but it is a problem for our students who are USA-born students and need to get into a program or want to get into this kind of program. So it's just food for thought, something that you guys can start addressing and figuring out what you can do to open the doors to more amazing USA students.
No, I completely agree. SC has a very, university-wide, has, pretty big bragging rights on the international student population that we have.
And it's great, but the big picture is that you're educating these students and they're taking their knowledge back to the country that they came from, which is great, but we need to have the talent stay here so that we can have amazing buildings as well. So, it's something that maybe, I don't know who to address it with.
I definitely brought it up with the assistant dean, Gail. We had an in-depth conversation about, the goals of trying to train more students and, if there's, SC has that international presence and that's something that they're looking into.
Also, though, remember that as the percentage of international students have increased university-wide and very much, we have a dean from China. I mean, he has brought in a tremendous amount of interest in USC. He's rolling off. This is his last year. There'll be another emphasis, I'm sure. However, the school population has also doubled. So we're a much bigger school. So we've casted a wider net, but we've got we've got more spots.
Right, but they're going to 50% international spots. So even if you have more spots, that doesn't increase the diversity for one, and it doesn't increase the number of or percentage of USA students, which is something that I'm passionate about, and that for me is very important. And obviously, diversity is extremely important to me as well. And women getting into the business, and Latinos and blacks, and and every other color in the rainbow you might think about. But international students and taking the wonderful talent that you're teaching them to their country is great, but we need to keep some of that talent here.
Off the record, I'm from USC. I contribute my talent if I have any to the USC.
But we need more of you.
I'm not sure you can do off the record while you're being whipped. But it's a nice try. Thank you, Michael.
Thank you.
Can we ask a question?
Sure, I'm not sure where we are with timing. We may have to break and continue while we eat lunch. But that's why we're gonna check and see if we can push our tour back a little bit. What's your question?
Well, it was just clarification, I think, what Michael was asking. How do we determine when someone can take the exam? And at the last meeting, I asked you, and I could see the text that the school would have the opportunity to tell, I don't know if we haven't done it yet, but we would tell you, CAB, that these students are in our IPEL program and they're therefore allowed to take the test.
You're asking what's the reporting method?
Yeah, what was the, I think the language change that was needed,
Right.
and what the process will be, what do you envision?
In terms of process, last I heard from NCARB is maintaining a registry, if you will, of your students. So they will be interfacing with you, and then they will have access to the lever to facilitate the early examination, the early ability to test.
But if one of our students wants to get licensed, their initial license in Ohio, these fine people have nothing to say about that. Right? So that's an NCARB thing.
Correct.
Yeah.
Okay, I was under the impression we would work directly with you, not through NCARB, but for instance, we haven't told NCARB who our students are. That hasn't happened, and if we haven't been asked for that.
No, you raise a good point. These schools have all been blessed, if you will, by NCARB, and so I think there's a need for NCARB as the mothership to communicate with all 14 of you and let you know the deal. Here's how it's going to happen. Here's how we're going to facilitate testing.
So that question needs to go to NCARB.
I will pose the question to my counterpart at NCARB.
Good question. Thank you very much for joining us today. I'm going to suggest we break, for it looks like we can't push our tour back, so we're going to have to push our lunch back. And hopefully the tour won't be too long for those of you who are hungry, those of us who are hungry. And then we'll come back and we'll finish with the PQ Special Qualifications Report and North Carolina issue in open session. Maybe we'll do a working lunch. So apologize for those of you who want to stick around for that part, that we've got this little break in the middle that we're not able to adjust the tour schedule that we've that's well set up for us. Okay, so we'll take a break and we'll be back in what, maybe hold it like 30 minutes?
Depends on how long we wait here. Depends how much longer. It's clear day.
I'm guessing 15 minutes. Reconvene the open session, and now we close our open session. Now we're going to go. We can go into closed session.
Did that have to be registered?
Correct. Got it. Thank you all for waiting us out. Sorry, we got a little behind schedule. Okay, we're back in open session, and Doug, you have the Professional Qualifications Committee report up next. Are you presenting that, or yeah, I'm going to do that?
Actually, Tim's gonna do a summary.
I have a quick summary, and then Marcus will continue on. So on July 12th, the Professional Qualification Committee convened a full meeting, and myself and the staff within Sacramento office and most of the other participants is calling in from remote location, including some of the public presentations. So we discussed the strategic plan objectives to collaborate with California NCAP accredited program and NCAP to establish and promote an integrated path to architecture licensure, I we call it. And so you can see this from item F. Staff is currently monitoring the SB 1479, which has language pending IPAL. The bill is on the governor's desk for action. And staff is also monitoring NCAP's communications for the latest information related to IPAL. Actually, some of the discussions that occurred this morning, some of the technical logistic details needed to be in concert with state. And then the second agenda item was to receive updates regarding some of the strategic objective discussions, which is we will conduct a review of ARE testing environment in order to ensure security and efficiency of the testing environment. And staff, I think, is scheduled to have on-site visit sometime early next year. And then NCAP has a resolution, the 2015-02 regarding alternative for certification of foreign architects, which that the committee has informed the board voted to support alternative certification methods and receive the clarification requirement from NCAP. So this is kind of streamlined a little bit of architecture experience requirement for foreign architects as well. So number 3 is we kind of deferred that the more detailed discussion of the strategic plan objective to evaluate profession in order to identify entry barriers and diversities as we discussed this morning. And the staff is put this in this December's strategic workshop as one of the discussion areas, right? And Marcus wanted to take on, I think it's H2 is the agenda item.
H2 in your packet is the item on identifying barriers for diverse groups. And at the PQC meeting, staff presented the data that you see covered in the packet. There has been an increasing growth in diversity within the profession. The latest information we have from NCARB shows that it has nearly doubled since 2007. It's at 44%. Additionally, applicants who identify themselves as non-white representing 30% of new NCARB record holders. And this is based on it's the 2016 NCARB by the numbers, which is the 2015 data that they had. And this compared to 23% in the 2000 U.S. Census Bureau data. So NCARB has definitely shown through its data that there is growing diversity in the profession. Staff looked at a variety of data, and we have some of our own data looking at our own population. As of July 1 of this year, our current architect population is 20,900, and it consists of 20% women, 80% men, but that has increased. And there's also a table chart that goes back for the past 10 years for the last attachment. And it'll show the continual growth in the number of women that are seeking licensure in California. Staff recommended to PQC that we made 3 recommendations: collaborating with NOMA, assigning a board member to serve as a liaison with NOMA, and inviting its representatives to attend board and committee meetings. We also recommended further student access to NAB accredited programs, encouraging California community colleges with architectural programs to collaborate with NAB accredited programs in developing articulation agreements. And then also inspiring student interest in the profession through licensed professionals. Right now, California has 1,800 high schools and 2,600 middle schools. And so the suggestion of staff is that local architects through the AIA could speak with students within their respective communities regarding the profession, and that through this mix of leadership and outreach, it could inspire individuals to consider architecture as a career. So the PQC voted to approve the recommendation, and now it's before the board to consider PQC's recommendations.
Yeah, an appropriate motion will be to approve REC's recommendations, and I think another piece was to also further the conversation in December when we're at strategic planning, and we've got the facilitator, and we've all done our environmental science. So it wouldn't be a final action, it would be a prelude to further action.
If I made a motion, can I make a comment afterward during call to question? Yeah, so I'll, so move to approve.
Is there a second? Seconded? Okay.
Okay, so, I'm not sure exactly what the page is, because it might be different on the attachment versus the book. But there's a statistic where it specifically mentions, one of the bullet points specifically mentions that Hispanic or Latino NCARB record holders increased, but it doesn't say how. It says 44% of the talent pool was minorities, so that'd be something maybe to get that information down the line, whether it's in December. It's just wrapped into it, but it doesn't specify.
It wasn't specific, yeah, I recall that factoid in that staff. We'll follow up on
It does show up, there is more information about that later on. It talks about that Hispanics have a greater percentage
Yeah,
of graduation, 17%.
What page are you looking at?
I'm looking at,
Is it one of the bullet points under the H?
so it's the next page after the bullet points, and it's on the very bottom.
Oh, National Center of Education.
Second page after agenda item H2.
Yeah, so it says, basically it says that we're beating the national average, but then when you go to the next page, it still says that African Americans and Hispanics are still underrepresented in the industry.
Well,
But
the-
are we beating the national average because we have more Hispanic in the state?
Well, I think the encouraging thing is the profession profile today is different than what it will be 10 years from now.
Right.
And the new cohort, the new generation, people pulling new NCAR certificates and getting new licenses and new graduates, those percentages are much higher. So as the current practitioners begin to retire out, that higher percentage cohort is going to go through, and I think the numbers are going to be radically different in the next decade.
Even from 2007, the increase is pretty significant.
Yeah.
Well, I'll just show there's obviously more that we can do, and when we talked about this, there was a member of the committee I was on. There was a member of the committee I was on last year, and she really wanted NCAR to have a diversity policy, which is good and is healthy and all that good stuff. But the goal was to have the licensing boards be more diverse, which is also great and important. But I told her, NCAR could adopt 100 different diversity policies and it won't change anything. It's ultimately up to the folks who are politically connected, the associations, to give lists of names to appointing a board. Those lists need to be diverse, otherwise your boards will not be diverse. And so there will be some sort of, I suspect, call to action from NCAR to AIA to step up and make sure that happens.
Even if you have a board that's diverse like ours, that doesn't mean that the schools are going to do their part to ensure that there are open slots for diverse students. So, and international students, I find, are not diverse. They're international students. They don't qualify in my eyes as United States diverse students. They're just international students. And so even if, we were all, every board in the United States was diverse, that doesn't mean that things are going to change. It has to change from the school and the mentality there to ensure that there's more slots. However, the fact that you want to reach out to high schools and middle schools is a great idea, and try to get those kids motivated and ready to move on to this kind of a career. And I can't remember if Pitbull, if he's an engineer or an architect.
Really?
Yeah. And I don't know which of the two he is. He's
He's the guy with the nice haircut.
I'll ask my kids.
But it would be great to try to explore to see whether he can do kind of this is why I love this, this was my start. But I don't remember if he's an engineer or an architect, but he's one of those two. It'd be good for him to do a little video for
Can you
us.
explain why you dumped architecture? Became a.
No, he still loves it. Like, I still think he does it. It's still part of, I think he, I can't remember, he did his house, he was, he built it himself and he did all this. So, but at least it gives that cool people go into the business,
That leads me to this morning's discussion, I forgot Wednesday, that landing and DVC, the Apple Valley College mentioned that if we consider the college education as a part of architecture education at the university level, then it really helps with diversity because they see tremendous diversity at their level and the local college level. And also same time they point out, interesting news that they have a huge amount of international students in college, community college. That's really new to me. Oh yeah, they are. Last year they're almost up to 35%.
Wow.
Yeah. I've always understood that the attraction of universities bringing international students had two components. One is it's prestigious for the school to have an international standing and exposure, and it helps attract, better professors and things. But a big part of it is revenue.
It's full ride.
It's cash money,
Yep.
they charge more for, out-of-state tuitions,
Yep.
and that's why they do it.
Same as.
So I don't know how you break that habit.
Yeah, it was out
We want to make college free for everybody, like Hillary
Board
said.
of
She said that.
Education.
Make college free for everybody, didn't she say
Yes,
that?
I should
absolutely.
take the birdie position. Okay.
Trust
So
me.
I have a question about these numbers too, and maybe Marcus or Tan can help. I was actually really surprised to see that in California, even though the number of licenses being issued to women now in this past year has increased greatly, up to 39%. When blended though, it's still only like 21% in California, but nationally it's 34. So how could it be? The national, oh, I read it wrong. It says the national average of women newly licensed is 34.
Right.
I was gonna say, California cannot be this far behind. Okay, so I see what's going on is that it's trending.
It's that new cohort though, I mean, the kids who are just
Yes.
getting licensed, just graduating.
Yeah,
They represent a higher percentage
yeah.
of those underrepresented groups. So I think
That's a good-
that's a good
thing.
sign. The trend is in you can't immediately switch the dynamic,
Right.
the demographics of the profession unless
Yeah,
you
yeah, yeah.
convince a bunch of people to retire.
And last year was a very good year. We had nearly 40% of the licenses issued to
Women, that's all, not quite parity, but really darn close. Especially if you listen to the presentations today from the two universities, it's 52% women in college.
Yes.
And
You have a problem with that?
You have a problem with that?
As a male, I think that the trend is going way heavily towards women in colleges. There are other colleges that are 70% women and 30% men, and I'm just putting that out there for the record. That things are really, I mean, I think that the education system, this is personal views, but the education system, I think, plays more towards women in the last 20 or 30 years. You see all the boys in school that they want to put on Ritalin, and they don't let boys be boys. And it's not a subject that we can deal with, but I just thought I'd throw my viewpoint out there.
Yeah.
Like, in my community, girls are going to school more, in college more than the boys are. But it's just, I think it's just across the board.
It
All
is.
boys don't want to go to school, it's just not what it,
Yeah.
they think that getting a rap career or, you know.
Pipeline too.
Yeah, or do something, yeah, exactly, create an app and they're gonna be billionaires, because they wanna get there fast. I just think we need to change the language for boys to explain to them that this is kind of, you have to go to college, it's not as easy as it seems.
The whole education
I
system needs
wouldn't,
to be changed.
limit that language change to just boys.
Men,
Yeah. Well, no, young girls have, the whole younger generation have somewhat
statistically,
unrealistic
girls-
expectation
yeah, for
about
sure.
what the world is going to give them when they go out in the job market. And my 4 kids are all having, a serious bout of reality in the last few years. Yeah.
Anyway, but no, I'm really happy to see the trend going toward more women actually getting licensed, because there was a project which is now called Equity by Design. We talked about that this morning. And that's all about gender equality in our profession. Well, what's going on is that the original name for it was the missing 32%. Okay, so now they decided that was too, I don't know what the problem with that was, but it is now just called Equity by Design. And so the whole issue is about there's this whole continuum, which is that 52, 70%, whatever you want to say, of women are in college, and let's just pick architecture because that's what we're about. Then by the time they get licensed, you notice it's down to the 30s. It's almost half of the enrollment. And then after 10 years, that number drops again. Because the profession, now I could be wrong, but that's what I understand anecdotally, the profession is not kind to women who have to go through their normal life balance of having children and this and that. So in my practice, I have to be very, very cognizant of that and allow for flex hours, and flex days, and doing everything we can to engage the women who leave to go have children and to come back and have a flexible schedule.
Yeah.
It's really tough for the employer. It's really tough for the employee, but that's the kind of mindset that
But that's the kind of stuff you have to do.
You have to do
Because
it.
you're still hiring people.
Yeah.
You know, a lot of the statistics and the charts that were in the board packet that relate to those issues, I mean, they're really, those are the result of unenlightened employers. Those are employer actions that are creating some of this dissatisfaction. And, you know, that's just, maybe that's a cultural thing in our profession that has to shift. But I think more and more employers are thinking in terms of how to recognize those things.
How about HMC, you're a much bigger firm. Do you have policies in place that allow for flex time and so forth?
We have, yes, all the policies for flex time, all the policies for new dads, FMLA, we've got it all. I don't think there's anything we don't have.
That's great.
Well, we'll have to, whether we're big or small. We
Yeah.
still have to comply with the same laws and provide the same opportunities anymore.
Yeah, we have, I mean, and we can cut below that, we have bonuses for licensure, reimbursement for exams, just study sessions. So, yeah. I just want to go back to the motion just a little bit. I think the motion is to accept staff recommendations to establish a diversity strategic plan. I'd like to offer a friendly amendment to that motion and use staff's recommendations as the foundation for establishing a strategic plan, because I believe that this board has to have a much deeper conversation about what it can actually advocate for the position that we sit in, whether it's going to be professional, whether it's going to be practice, whether it's going to be regulation. We've got to figure out what it is we really advocate for and then charge at that, because that's going to be a much deeper conversation. So this is a good start, the recommendations, but if you look at the recommendations, there's really nothing here the board can do on any of these recommendations.
Good point. Do you accept the friendly amendment?
Accept.
Okay.
A question really, one of the materials, the attachments, I think the Oregon study mentions, I think they call it in one place pipeline linkage, but it was the point that people of color drop out of architectural degrees at an advanced rate, and they just say that suggests the schools are a problem. They don't say what the schools are doing wrong, how they can fix that. Was there any discussion in the material about that, or has that been discussed before about how the schools can correct themselves if they are that problem?
Well, when I read that, I'm not sure I really believe that it's necessarily just a school problem. Because, you know, my understanding is there's half of the people who go through and get college degrees in architecture don't go into traditional practice, but, you know, some of them go off and go to, you know, higher paying jobs with contractors or developers, or they go into government, or they, you know, work for AIA. You know, there's a lot of other places where they leave the profession to go into, you know, sort of.
But do they get the degree first in all those cases? That's the question I saw.
Well, the last statistic I remember hearing was that approximately half of the architectural graduates don't end up going into traditional practice. And I don't know if that's still the case. Maybe it's changed in the last couple of years, but that's in round numbers, what I recall. Which is pretty high.
Yeah, I agree with you on what I recall being similar. I'd have to double check my figures on that.
I wonder how it relates to other professions. So does everybody who goes to law school become a lawyer? Or do they end up working in government? Or they, you know, they're not necessarily traditional, you know, hang a shingle, you know.
Can we get that information up with doctors, lawyers, you know, some of the engineers?
I'm sure it's economically driven too sometimes, especially for
Yeah.
We can look into it and see what we can.
That would be great. That's a really good.
We may not just be the only one that has this problem.
Well, I think also ties to Pascal's point about what we can do and where, you know, do we have any power to really move the schools to change their curriculum in those ways that would encourage that? Maybe we really can't. It's a different.
And if the issue is just schools, there's many issues, many issues. We need to find the issues that we can do something about or advocate for.
I could be wrong in this observation, but I have heard, again anecdotally over the years, that the reason that a lot of minority students don't enter the field after they go to school is because they find that the pay is so low compared to, say, if you were a lawyer or a doctor or whatever else, that it becomes very unattractive. to make a living after all these years of school. I mean, look at how intense it is. And all the internships and so on and so forth, they find out they're making very little compared to other professions. And that's what I had heard over the years, mostly through the AIA surveys that were done. I don't know, and the reason I bring it up is because I don't know why women, whatever you said, leak through the pipeline. Women may have a different set of reasons, including life balance, but it could be also salaries.
I suspect I think the economics definitely, and because we've got so many other allied industries, the construction and development industry, the animation industry, those studios, they're attracting and they're offering more money than they can make going into traditional practice. We had a great employee who was working through her internship and her IDP, and she's started taking tests, and she got stolen away by a contractor who's paying her a lot of money. And she had a lot of soul searching, and we talked her through it, to help her understand. But at some point, you take that fork in the road, and there's no easy way to come back, because your professional development atrophies at that point because you're doing other stuff. But she did it for economic reasons, and we understood. So it happens.
What do you think that the salary problem would cross cultural and gender lines? I mean, I wouldn't think it would just apply to women or.
Well, I think it applies to everybody.
Yeah, I think you kind of see that.
It's professionalized.
Yeah.
It's a professionalized.
Well, there is another anecdotal, I'm not ever quoting any surveys or anything, but the minority population who are going to study architecture and then going to practice architecture most often come from families that are not as able to help the problem with the safety net. And so if you're going to spend all those years in school and go through the licensing process, you need to be self-supporting.
Right.
And a lot of them cannot. And this is what, again, I've heard it through the AIA stuff that, because I've been on the national board and so forth. And it's just been kind of understood that the safety net isn't there. And that's why they have to make a salary that they can support a family.
Actually, in the packet, that is one of the points that the AIA survey came up with, was that it's very expensive to go to the schools. And that was one of the suggestions, is that there needed to be a greater investment from the community to make it more affordable and inviting.
But there's a reason why it's called a gentleman's profession.
Well,
But just you said something about the community needs to make a bigger investment, and I don't think it's the community that needs to make the investment. I think it's the schools that need to make it more accessible. If they're spending thousands and hundreds of thousands to go and recruit international students across the world, they need to invest those dollars into ensuring that California students, United States students can get into the schools of their choice. And I think that's across the board in all ethnicities, not just minorities.
It might also be complicated by the whole NAP accreditation process. And I'm not an expert in it, but there's some, schools have to deal with compliance with NAP accreditation requirements that include physical space and, and resources and things that, probably add to the burden, but the schools haven't been able to. And it'd be worth, evaluating how much that stuff is really, relevant in this day and age.
I find that universities, for USC, for instance, and no disrespect to all of you who went to USC, I mean, pretty much USC is the big elephant in LA now. I mean, it's gobbling up every block around its campus, and it's moving on to by USC Hospital, and it's kind of gobbled up all that area. So they are not short of money.
Did you say
but
USD or
USC?
USC.
Yeah, and yet minority students can't get in because it's unaffordable. So we really need to, or I guess somebody needs to, I don't know that it's our charge to do that, but it really needs to be an easier process to get our students into school. And I'm talking about USA students altogether, not ethnic students. I'm talking about USC when American-born students can't get in because all the slots are being used by international students. We have a chronic problem, and that is going to manifest itself in 10, 15 years, and we're going to be short of professionals in all careers because it started. And we're seeing it with architects. It's going to happen with medicine. It's going to happen with attorneys. It's going to happen with every career because there's just not enough spots.
I also think it's more of introducing the profession to the community and letting people know what their options are, making our pipeline programs such as the junior colleges, making them stronger so that they have the relationships with the USC. Like East LA's program is an amazing program and they have that relationship with USC. Although USC is expanding into the community, they do have scholarships available for those people that live in those communities to go to the university. But we need to educate people and let them know their opportunities in order to even have an interest in the profession.
Isn't it great that we're in California where those of us who don't have the money to go to college can still become an architect? It's awesome.
Absolutely.
Yeah, and therein, I think, is the issue that I sort of touched on, that I would speak on much more in depth if we were to take this to a strategic planning initiative, is that it's not just a university issue, it's not just a university barrier. I believe personally the barrier is one of inspiration. Folks are not being inspired to be architects. Because if you have the inspiration, there are no barriers in this state. Because you don't need all the other criteria.
But I don't think that that's necessarily true.
I can tell you that it's true because there's two individuals sitting here that form a pathway.
Yes, and that's probably it's not something that's happening now. This is a problem, a chronic problem that's current. It's current today. We're talking about 18, 19 years old students that are trying to get into school and they can't because there's no room for them. And it's a chronic problem. Yes, maybe 20 years ago or 15 years ago when you guys graduated, yes, that there was more opportunities, but now there isn't. It's a problem. And with 209, that happened 30 years ago, it's a bigger problem now for my emerging or minority.
All I'm saying is that it's not a problem if it's not a barrier to you. And I think that's where it needs to be a much deeper conversation.
For sure.
About what can be done and what can be done about inspiring individuals to join the profession.
I think that, like Ebony was saying earlier, it's just children, youth being exposed to the careers that exist out there. I often will sponsor career fairs, and it's pretty easy to find teachers and counselors to come out and speak to kids, but it's a lot harder to find engineers and architects in those careers. So it's just like that exposure that starts at an early age, so that if they know that opportunity exists, maybe it's more really interested in.
No question about it, that helps, and there's no question that the issue that you raised exists, and it's existed for a lot longer than it should have. The advantage here is that if you can't get a seat at school, you don't have to necessarily give up your goal, because there's an alternate pathway that doesn't exist in a lot of places. But it's still an issue. I don't know how you solve it, because I think it's predominantly an economic one for universities.
I have a staff member that's been trying to become a nurse now for almost 11 years, but she can't get into the classes she needs to graduate. So she's been, working for me as an ambassador, but she can't graduate because she can't get into the classes that she needs. And, she's thinking that she's going to change her career. But she's already invested all this time to become a nurse and she can't because there's no room in the classes she needs to graduate.
And also, not every profession has the multiple pathways that the architectural profession enjoys in California.
Right.
And I believe that when there's a shortfall, and this is perhaps where the board is one area the board can look, is exploiting those pathways, making sure that we're advocating those pathways so that people that maybe don't know or don't have that awareness can become aware and perhaps be excited and inspired.
And like Lisa's saying, that, communicating this so that high school kids, community college kids know that they've got options that they may not have been aware of. Okay, anything further on this? We have a motion on the floor. Do we want to, been friendly amended? Okay, the motion on the floor is to accept the staff recommendation as a foundation for developing a strategic plan initiative.
With the friendly amendment.
Huh?
With the friendly amendment.
Right. I think that's what your amendment is. That
Foundation.
Yes.
Second?
And it's seconded. So if we're ready to call for the question, all in favor say aye.
Aye.
Roll call.
Oh, roll call. John Baker. John Baker.
Aye.
Denise Campos.
Yes.
Tian Fin.
Aye.
Pascal Gutierrez.
Yes.
Sylvia Juan, yes. Ebony Lewis.
Aye.
Matt McGinnis.
Aye.
Robert Pearman.
Yes.
And Yosef Srong.
Aye.
Unanimous.
Very good. Last item. Doug, are you taking this to North Carolina board update?
I'll give you the short version, and Michael will provide the legalese. This is the court case that we've talked about at several board meetings. It's actually from the U.S. Supreme Court, and it deals with the immunity afforded state licensing boards and what situations might wipe out that immunity. The North Carolina Dental Board went pretty far out of bounds and was essentially issuing enforcement citations to shopping malls that had kiosks selling teeth whitening substances and kits. So clearly they're beyond their realm in terms of the Practice Act, scope of practice, and the issue became litigated and went to the Supreme Court. So Michael will talk about the holding and what it means for us. There are a number of different resources. There's actually a state attorney general's opinion. There are Federal Trade Commission guidelines. There's of course the Supreme Court decision. I had the pleasure of serving on a panel for NCAR with the regional summit on this issue. Different states are approaching it differently. There are states who have urgently reconstituted boards and created public member majorities. There are states where the attorney general has to approve everything the board does, et cetera, et cetera. There's a whole continuum, but it's important that we have a strong set of the facts based upon the law. So Michael, you illuminate us, please?
I'll try. Okay, I'll try to keep this brief because I only want to highlight just a couple things. First, with the decision itself, and then the guidance that was issued by the FTC as well as the Attorney General's office. So the court case itself, what it did was that it created a new test for determining if the board could be held liable for violations of antitrust law. So it didn't straight up say that certain things that the boards are doing are antitrust violations. That's not what it's about, and that's kind of a misconception. What it is, it's just more of, is immunity afforded to the boards? Because before this case, we assumed it was. But what this case did was it carved out kind of a test. And specifically, what it says is that a board on which a controlling number of decision makers are active market participants are only entitled to immunity from antitrust actions if they meet two requirements. And that's the board must act pursuant to clearly articulated and affirmatively expressed state policy to replace competition with regulation of the profession. And the second is the board's decisions must be actively supervised by the state. So that's the kind of test we go through, but really the court didn't provide enough facts or enough detail what to go through. So that's why this is an area of law that's going to be shaped through the future court cases unless there are other statutes that or regulations that the FTC might issue, or if in our case we try to address that kind of ambiguity or vagueness in that Supreme Court case from a legislative standpoint. That's what they tried to do, but the bill did not go through, so most likely some form of the language will try to go over into the next legislative session. So for now, we're just kind of hobbling along and trying to see what we can do to stay out of trouble, but I think your president said it best when if the board focuses on public protection, more likely than not, you'll stay out of trouble. Because that's your paramount goal. That's the thing that the board has to keep in mind. And if you stay on that course, it might not survive a North Carolina action, but most likely it would survive an antitrust action or someone trying to claim that whatever the board is doing is violative of the Sherman Antitrust Act. So the FTC, they weighed in on the decision in October 2015. So what they did was they issued some guidance in terms of what's a reasonable restraint on trade that doesn't violate the antitrust laws. And so some examples they gave were having prohibitions on false or misleading advertising, or suspending the license of one of your licensees for doing substandard work or unprofessional conduct. And also non-discretionary acts or ministerial actions that follow a statutory scheme. So, the regular rulemaking that the board goes through. And what the FTC also gave guidance on was, what does active supervision mean? And that's also what, again, we tried to address that in the legislative bill, which just didn't make it out of the House. Active supervision, according to the FTC, supervisor must review the substance of the anti-competitive decision, and the supervisor must have the power to veto or modify particular decisions. The supervisor cannot be an active market participant. So the key question there in the FTC's guidance is, has the state played a substantial role in determining the specifics of the economic policy that the board wants to further? And finally, the Attorney General's opinion. Well, what the Attorney General's office weighed in on are decisions that would either be likely or less likely to be scrutinized in terms from an antitrust standpoint. So decisions that would be more susceptible to a successful legal challenge, the office said, were things like creating barriers to entry of the profession and licensing, or imposing heavy burdens on applicants for licensure, price regulations, or restrictions on competitive bidding. Decisions that were less likely to be successfully challenged, quote-unquote nuts and bolts regulations, just the everyday or how to go procedurally through the rules that the board has. Disciplinary decisions, as well as decisions that promote competition. So where this leaves the board now is that, well, as I said, we're still in kind of a wait-and-see approach. If you stick to your mandate, that's the most that we can ask for all of you as board members on all your respective boards. And the takeaway here really is that what the case told us is that a lack of immunity does not mean that a board's conduct violates the antitrust laws. So that's, again, that's an important thing to keep in mind, is that it's not automatically that what we're doing we have to review from an antitrust standpoint. It's just, does that immunity exist as a threshold question? So that's my nutshell summary.
So in the end, after a year of writing and rewriting and editing and resolving all of this stuff, now it didn't survive the legislative process, so nothing's going to change.
Right, nothing yet. That's why they're going to, most likely, something will be introduced in the next session.
Well, it was fun. Comment on that? Any other issues?
No, I mean, I'll just share, this is kind of before where I've tried to advise the board when we're getting to a point where we're almost assisting the profession rather than protecting consumers. And it's not always a bright line, and I can't always articulate it in a way that's understandable, but I know when we're getting close, so I try to wave that banner. We have board counsel here, and then DCA exec is usually here as well. So you'll definitely have some indicators if we're getting close to that line. I know you guys will do the right thing.
Well, I think my comment is most of the things that were proposed already to some extent take place with this board, as far as the way we make decisions, the oversight that we have on your office. There's still a lot of that, those constraints and protections are there, kind of watching what we did.
I agree. We're many strides ahead of a lot of state architectural boards. But there are some that are quasi-privatized. They own their own buildings. They're barely part of state government. So I can only imagine what they do. We're very different from them, obviously.
Okay. Anything else? Okay, then I guess we'll see you all in December.
We're going to adjourn the meeting.
Meeting adjourned.
Great.